At some point in my internet journey, I stumbled across Pocket Fantasy RPG, and it's taken me a while to get the video going because I spent a lot of time making up the little cards to play it with, and it is designed to be used with cards if you wish. And I find this game to be incredibly robust for the soloist. This is not a solo rule set. It is a very basic, in the best way, D6 based rule set where essentially you are rolling a D6 and comparing it to a difficulty level for the task and succeeding or failing based on that roll. And the rules themselves are extremely short, like they can fit into, well, a pocket. And yet there's a ton of material. This is probably the closest thing to clickbait you'll ever see on my channel. And if you're a viewer of my channel and you see something like this, it is very enticing. And we are going to get into all the things that are in this stack. But before we do that, before I even get into going over the very basic rules or the types of characters you can play, here's a ranger, and here is a fighter, a wizard, a cleric. Before we get into that, I want to start by showing you what is, I think, perhaps the most enticing thing about this game, especially for the soloist, but for really any game master who wants to get a game going quickly, and that is these pages. These pages are adventures, and what you can do is you could make these into cards if you wanted. I didn't do that because they didn't fit. The amount of space here is too big for the poker-sized card that I'm using. But it comes with 3 sets of pages with 9 images and an associated adventure that you can choose or roll on randomly. So if you were just rolling randomly and we were saying using this page, 1, 2, 3, 4, you would have rolled up this picture and the associated adventure. And we get an entire little story here. In this case, this village has been besieged for many months from hordes of monsters. Thankfully, the surrounding citadel walls have been a stalwart defense against the waves of attacks. The village numbers are dwindling and hope is fading throughout this once powerful land. Perhaps not the most unique description, but definitely something. You get adventure hooks. A great orc war chief is settling an ancient grudge between the people and his tribe. A boy from the village has taken a sacred artifact belonging to a zealous group of monsters. A great beast has claimed a tribe of monsters' land, and they now seek to evict the townsfolk from their village. So there's like 3 or 4 different adventure hooks that you have there. You are even given the suggestion of what monsters you could use for the weak monsters, for the average monsters, and for the tough monsters, and even for the bosses. And these monsters are, for the most part, not 100%, because I feel like I haven't actually found an orc, but available in monster cards with stats, and we will look at that over the course of the video. So you could, as a GM, just quickly roll on one of these pages and come up with something, or perhaps just look to a photograph or a drawing that is compelling to you and then read the associated description. And in this case, it's a natural cave deep within the forest, and there is talk around the village that gems may be inside, but there are strange sounds emanating from its passages and chasms. You have an adventure hook, and you have also the suggestion, again, the weak, the average, and the tough monster, as well as the boss. So you can see that it is extremely easy to set up, especially for the soloist, because you're given some framework for the monsters and the level of type of encounter, as well as the story. And we'll just look at one more, say, from this last page here. I mean, the drawings are very clear and evocative as to what they might be, but let's take a look at what this particular one could be. It is described as a dilapidated keep once used by a wizard's conclave for testing out spells of teleportation and space manipulation. The rooms are now gateways to large environments, much different than normal reality. They are bizarre and most certainly dangerous. We have some adventure hooks, a sick wizard seeking a rare medicine from one of the environments, monsters escaping the rooms, an alien plant sickening the surrounding townsfolk, or the party being stuck in a strange and alien world after entering the keep. And this has special rules where everything is alien. All monsters, plants, and structures look different and are bizarre. Each monster type has one new ability that manifests from a tentacle, feeler, flipper, claw, pod, slime, or other. Weapons, armor, and technology may take on fantastic shapes, etc. So you may need to create or house rule some things from the kind of standard fantasy monsters that come with this rule set. But you can see there is a range of things. And again, I find the drawing style and the art to be quite evocative, but it is certainly a stylistic and inviting, at least to me. And so the fact of having these type of adventure generators is really great. But there is so much more. There's actually an adventure plot generator, and this will give you a series of D6 tables to deal with some various things that might come up. For example, if you want to get you can roll 3d6 and get a bad situation or a situation, a prophecy is being fulfilled, a savior is born, the planets align. The bad thing is that there's a corrupt noble, and the location of this adventure is a wilderness ruin. So you could just use that to generate something, or you could use that to generate the overall framework and then go outside of these materials to develop it even further. And there's a basic table, for example, to determine what type of monster might be coming in, undead, humanoids, or beasts, and how many monsters they might be, the size of the room, etc. There is also, for dungeons, a table, well, two tables really, for castles, catacombs, dungeons, ruins, and temples. And then caverns and caves gets its own table. And these are each 2d6 tables. So for example, if we rolled here a 2 and a 3, we would get here a fire pit. Or if we rolled a 2 and a 3 on the other thing, we would get rapids. So it is just enough suggestion perhaps for you. So here we rolled up, that is so small, it's hard for me to read it. I think it says earn, and that value on this table is a stream. So very, very basic material. And if you want to be working with a very, very light rule set that doesn't have a lot of pieces to it, this could be enough for you. There's also something here that is going to allow you or explain to you how to match the type of loot that your party is getting with the difficulty of the room or area that the loot was found in. So that is a nice little mechanic here that will ensure that if your characters dealt with a very challenging space, they're going to be getting more valuable things out of it than if they were dealing with a less challenging space. And then there's a little suggestion here of how you can end up giving a monetary value to items, what those items must cost. Like mundane items are going to be D6 worth of gold, or a unique adventuring item with suggestions like a healing potion is going to be 200 gold. And so again, it all becomes like a toolkit or a workbook for you to plan out what you are going to be equipping your characters with. Perhaps you're going to make a store. We saw this big stack of things here. These are mostly magic, but not all magic items. And so here happened to be healing potion right on top. There isn't a price given on it, but using this in conjunction with this suggestion, you could come up with a price for it. And for example, here is a Staff of the Guardian. This is obviously it's a type of weapon, and it is only for wizards, and it explains exactly what it does. And this focus is a rule that we'll get into when we look at the rules, and it has a usage value here. Many things in this game have a usage value, and you can tick off the number of times you've used it by just writing on your card. I do want to go over the Pocket Master tips that are given here because it gives you a sense of the philosophy behind this game. So it says, number one, it's designed for spur-of-the-moment play with little or no prep. With this goal in mind, many rules or situations are not covered within. Use the task system when these incidents may arise. And the task system we've talked a little bit about, which is the very basic D6 roll that you will do, and depending on the level of the task, you will have to get a value higher than a certain number to succeed. So for example, an average task on the D6 roll will be a success on a 4+, but a very difficult task is only going to succeed on a 6+. So it is super simple, and every single thing in the game revolves around this task system. And you may even say to yourself, might not be worth rolling for something that is only going to fail on a 1, and you might just do it. On the other hand, to have that little bit of kind of fate or randomness in there, you might decide you would even have a laughable roll and then decide on a 1 something super bad would happen. So it is based on that system, and continuing on, it is talking again to the PM, or the Pocket Master, the game master for this game, to help the characters, give them a free re-roll and let them take the best result. That is suggested especially for daring, heroic, or selfless actions. Basically, the way I would play it would be, there's many rules that say you can re-roll something and take the best result. I would play it simply just as rolling with advantage, like you're rolling 2d6 in that case and taking the best result. Now, in this case, of course, the both result is the same, but in many cases it will be different. So rather than re-rolling a single die, I would just at the outset roll 2 dice, well, I'm rolling a lot of doubles, and take the best result for a situation like that. Conversely, being in a situation that's essentially rolling with disadvantage, rather than a re-roll, I would just take the worst result. I'm not sure that that rule is in the game, but if the rule was there, that's how I would do it. And in this case here, it's saying for hindering the characters, it's either increasing the difficulty of the task or giving the monster or the enemy the advantage as opposed to giving yourself a disadvantage. So it sort of is taken care of in that way. And very, very simple kind of random table for yes or no. 1 to 3 no, 4 to 6 yes. And the very basic leveling up system, you can add an HP, for example, or you could give yourself a specialty, something that you will, again, it says re-roll, or you may just roll with advantage too. And finally, they are giving you a suggestion for how to create monsters, and the combat has to do with the number of dice or the way in which the d6 is modified for a monster. So a small monster combat roll is going to be the d6, but then taking away 3 from the result, whereas the largest monster is just going to be rolling the straight d3, the straight d6. And speaking of monsters, you do have a monster table here. All the monsters are, and their abilities are described here. As I said, I do have cards for them, although I did notice, now it could be that I printed this out so long ago that I just don't remember where I even got the specifics from, although I am obviously going to put a link down in this video as to where you can get the material now. But I didn't end up, for example, with an orc here. So I want to say that everything on this chart is in one of my cards. I'm not completely sure that is the case, but we'll take a look. For example, the sample card here. Here is our troll, and the stats are pretty basic. That combat score, what they are rolling in combat, the HP, in this case it is 18, and the whether they do melee or ranged, and a troll is only going to do melee, and in this case they could be a boss monster, and they have their keywords here, which are large, regenerate, strong, and they have a weakness to fire. And these are all described here. Again, super small font. They it's printed very small, but it's a little bit easier to read on the cards, and it is explained here. So I like having the cards. Plus, there's a little cute art. You have everything here to mark off, including if you want to use this for your keeping track of the HP of the monster. And we'll just take a look at a few of the other cards. Here, there's a mummy, and you can see the attributes. For example, the mummy has the ability of disease. So if the monster deals the damage, you need to roll a d6 for each of the damaged characters at the end of the encounter. And on a 1, the inflicted character does not get any of its reroll benefits until they are healed by 1 point of holy light or some other magical means. So kind of thematic detriment that you would get. It also has a mundane immunity to non-magical weapons do 0 damage to the mummy. It is slow. It attacks after all the other participants have acted in each combat round, and it has the keyword undead, which means it's a once living creature which is now animated by dark magic, powerful entities or artifacts. It is immune to the confusion spell and to drowning. So a pretty descriptive and thematic enemy that you get here on the one card. We didn't really look at the troll. We'll just take a look at the troll. The troll is quite large. It can regenerate, so it gets to heal 1 HP on their action each combat rounds, and it will regenerate for d6 combat rounds. It also is strong. It does 1 extra point of damage to its attack action, and it is a weakness against fire. So the rolls against this monster that are natural 6 might explode. So that gives you a sense of what the monsters look like in terms of being very basic in terms of the stats, as it were, and a little more descriptive in terms of various abilities and how that impacts the very basic d6 that you are rolling for that monster in combat. As we just take a look through here, and we have, for example, the vampire has a weakness to garlic, sunlight, wooden stakes, as you would expect. We have a giant lizard and a snake that you can see whether it does a constriction or a poison, a giant ant, a hellhound with a breath attack. So once per encounter, they may forego normal attacks as their combat action and instead make 1 ranged attack action with focus, which explodes. And I'll talk about focus in a minute. So you can see there is a variety in the type as well as the impact of the various abilities of the monster, the thematic abilities that the monster has. We even have a dragon. Minotaur. Things that you would expect in classic fantasy, and some maybe that you wouldn't. And a wolf. There is a gelatinous cube somewhere. I think we didn't look. I didn't show you quite everything here. We'll just end. And I didn't show you everything, but I showed you a lot. So we have the gelatinous cube, and it will do on damage. The target must make a tough task roll. So to know what that is, you refer to the task sheet, and what that means is you have to roll a 5 or more. So if you are getting damage, you roll for that, and if you fail, as we just did, what that means is we are stunned and we cannot move or take a combat action for d6 minus 2 rounds, and with a minimum of 1. So in that case, our character is basically paralyzed. We roll the d6, and we are going to be paralyzed for 2 rounds of combat. So we can't do anything representing this gelatinous cube kind of getting us and attacking us. That said, it also has the ability slow, meaning that its attack will last after all the other participants have acted in each combat round. And in terms of combat and also the magic system, basically this concept of focus is something that you can decide that the impact of whatever you're doing is going to be a 6 once per encounter, and that is focusing. And some of the things, including the items, will allow you to have a certain number of focuses and then no more. So for example, this mace here, it says it negates certain monster abilities, and you can use focus with it if you want once per encounter, but then you can only do that, as I understand it, as I think this means, you can only do that 5 times with this particular weapon before you no longer use that ability with this weapon. And we'll just take a look at some more of the items that we have here. So the Cape of the Dark Worlds will allow the wearer to always take their action before their enemies in combat. Basically, combat is very straightforward. You and the enemy are rolling for initiative, so whoever is higher gets to go first. You can move and attack, and your combat skill, the value that your character has in combat, as we saw, like it's a d6 plus or minus something. Well, let's take a look at our fighter here. So our fighter has a d6 minus 1 combat score. So he's going to be rolling a d6 and subtracting 1 for his combat value. And that is going to be used for both the attack and the defense action. So you will roll that, and the result you get is the damage done to the enemy. At the same time, the enemy is going to roll their combat die and either get wounded or not. So for example, in this particular case, let's say the ogre is the green die and we are the black die. We roll here and we have an attack of 2, but he's got a defense of 5. So indeed, he is not going to be wounded here. And if the ogre was fighting us back and he did an attack of 4, and we basically had no defense whatsoever and nothing else to help us by way of armor or whatever, we would be taking those 4 points of damage. So again, very simple and clean, but with the addition of abilities, it does become thematic. So in this case, the ogre has the hulking ability. He does 2 extra points of damage, and he is also large. So if you were playing this in a way where you were actually using models or something, tokens to represent your party and the characters in space, you may account for that, and that may or may not come into play in terms of the actual combat itself. We haven't really looked at the characters yet, so now lastly we'll take a look at the different types of characters. Before we do that, there's 4 different races. You could be a dwarf, an elf, a halfling, or a human. I can't find the human printout of the card, so I can't show that to you, but everything will give you some little description and a little benefit. So for example, for the halfling, this short, merry, barefooted race dwells in the hillside holes. They can re-roll all their defensive action against large monsters and take the best result. So in that case of this ogre, for example, thematically, you've got this teeny little halfling who's running around. The ogre maybe doesn't see him with his attack. So when the halfling is rolling, he, in my case, rather than re-roll, I would simply roll 2d6 and take the best result, in which case, in that case, I would have rolled a 4 for defense. So that is one of halfling special abilities, and they can also make a laughable task roll in forests or an average task roll in non-forest to become hidden. And again, as a reminder, this is referring to this chart here. So if they're in a forest and they want to hide, they can do that on a 2+ off a D6, and anywhere if they want to hide, they can do that off of a 4 plus. And so that's the special benefit of the halfling. Now, there, as I said, there's the elf and the dwarf and also humans, but there are also many categories of characters, and I have some of them printed out here. There are more than I have. This is not exhaustive. There are other ones, but we'll just take a look at a couple. So here's the fighter, and the card begins by telling you if there's any race. They call it race, not class. I always confuse that. Any race restriction here? No for fighter. So you could be, for example, you could be a halfling fighter if you wanted to be. And you have 10 HP. This is your combat score of a D6 for both melee and ranged. And you have abilities. So you can re-roll or have advantage in any task involving strength. A challenge once per encounter as a combat action. You can challenge an enemy to direct at least one of its attack actions against you. So if you are running a party and you have a character perhaps who's low in health, you can heroically step in and take whatever damage may be coming. And you also have the ability to have your rolls explode. So there's the exploding die, a d6, which if you roll the 6, you get to re-roll and sort of in theory keep rolling anytime you get a 6. So that is the profile of the fighter. The wizard is going to be quite different, and here is the wizard. Only humans or elves can be wizards, and they only have 4 HP, and their combat score is a d6 minus 2, both for melee and ranged. They can re-roll any task involving intelligence, and they have the ability to cast 2 spells per encounter from the magic spell list. That is done as a combat action, and the spell list, I got this a little bit out of order. There is a card somewhere with the magic spell list is right here. We'll take a look at that again. Just a fair warning that this is pretty small font. They, out of combat, they can also attempt to cast a freeform magic spell, which is basically a spell that they invent. So again, there is the built-in concept of kind of creative or narrative magic and building into your story something that will fit. In combat, though, there's the magic spell list, and there are some of these. For example, there's a dark bolt, which is going to do a d6 ranged attack, and you can cast that with advantage, so you can roll twice and take the best result. There's confusion. You roll a d6 minus 3, getting a minimum of 1, re-roll, taking the best result for the amount of combat rounds that an enemy may not move or take attack actions, though it may still take defense actions. So again, what that means is you're basically rolling 2d6. Again, I'm rolling doubles here. So in this case, for 2 rounds, this would confuse my enemy, so they would not take any attack action and they could only act defensively. An arcane armor is that the target of the spell makes all their defensive actions at a d6 roll, taking the best result for the duration of the encounter. So again, same thing. You are, wow, doubles again. That's crazy. You're doing a roll here, and you're taking the best result. So in this case, you would really get a big benefit from that. And some other spells that we won't go into detailing. We'll take a look lastly here at, there's a druid character, and the druid may be a human or an elf. And this druid has wilderness lore as an ability, so they can re-roll any tasks that are used to identify plants or calm beasts. They can basically get a beast friend from the summoned monster list and have it be under control for part of combat. And they can also try to make a potion outside of combat to cure disease or poison. So you can see the characters are pretty well differentiated, again, in a way similar to the beasts, where there's very little by way of actual stats, but the abilities are modifying the stats that are involved with the basic D6 to create the different kinds of characters there are. There's as well a cleric, and we already said that. There's a bard here, and the bard also has some music that they can sing in combat that will help other characters like do extra damage or take less damage or heal or force similar to a confusion, a melody of madness, that it will cause the enemies to become crazed, and they will have to make a tough roll to not become confused, and they will not be able to attack for a certain number of rounds. A thief, a spell sword, and as I said, there are a few others that I have not. There's maybe even a necromancer. I can't remember. I don't think I have them. I don't have them in cards, I don't think, but we've got, well, I did have a ranger. Here's a different picture of a ranger. There is an assassin, a berserker, and there's a commander, a gladiator, a necromancer, a martial artist, and we have the druid here. So that is a look inside Pocket Fantasy, and I did not even really begin to get into this huge stack of items and magic items, but we will just flip through this a little bit as I'm talking. You can pause the video if you want to read specifics about what these potions and items do. This is, as mentioned, just a wonderful, flexible, simple toolkit for gamers. Yes, as intended, as written about in the rules, to be something that you could just pull out and get going if you had some people coming over and didn't really have anything planned. There's essentially no rules to learn. You just give everybody well, you don't need to even give this. You just have, this is like your whole DM screen or your PM screen. And there's also a very convenient card that tells what everybody's starting equipment is. You just pass that out, give them some cards with their character, and maybe give them an item or two if you want, or they could be discovering these items along the way. And you're off to the races. You have enough beasts that you can randomize them. You could make a stack of cards and pull them in, or you could sort them in some way, follow the instructions of the adventure hooks that are letting you know what types or suggestions of monsters to use for different levels. And really nice, simple, but nice art here. Potion of Bloodlust allows the drinker to add 1 extra damage to their combat score for D6 combat rounds. Roll twice and take the best result. That's actually surprisingly strong thing to do. A Band of Demons. It allows its wearer to be immune to Dark Bolt, Confusion, Rain of Fire, as well as all forms of fire. You could, for yourself, separate these out into magical items, into regular items, armor, potions, and things. They could become part of treasure that is uncovered as you travel through a dungeon, or as I said, they could be something that is given out either randomly or by choice at the outset of a session to equip your character in some manner. Perhaps everybody gets 1 potion, or everybody gets their choice of a weapon or a piece of armor. Definitely a lot to choose from here with the items and the armor and the weapons. So that is a look inside Pocket Fantasy, and I hope you have enjoyed this. I think it can be played super effectively just on its own with this material, but bringing in something like the Tome of Adventure Design, even just that, to flesh out what's going on. If you really were wanting to have even more randomness, you could create your own table that would tell you what the task was going to be. So for example, let's say you weren't going to do laughable tasks. You could create a D4 table, and anytime anything happened, you would roll on that first to determine, act as the pocket master, basically determining what the difficulty of the task is. Or if you wanted to make the game harder, you could make it a D6 table, and instead you could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that you're weighted more toward a tough or a very difficult task. And you could roll that D6 when you encountered, say, a locked door, to determine that that locked door is going to be an average task. So a very simple, because it's all based off of a D6, it's a very simple mechanism for even creating something that will determine randomly the task for you. And for the soloist, having even that additional built-in, almost like AI, is especially helpful.